I'd like to welcome everyone that's here to 2018's third quarter Nationally Certified Trainers and Interviewers webinar. I'm Betsy Burns, and Quality Enhancement Specialist for CQL, and joining me is Quality Enhancement Specialist Ann Beekner, and our guest speaker and technical support, thanks Kathy, Director of Training and Certification, Kathy Adamek. You're going to hear us say to Kathy, please advance. So Kathy, please advance. Thank you. Today's agenda is about social roles. Kathy and I will be talking about social roles, and we'll be talking about person-centered thinking. Again, not to be confused with person-centered planning. And then toward the end, we'll hope to have time for questions and answers and to plan for the fourth quarter webinar. Advance, please. Thank you. So we'll begin talking about people performing social roles. One of the most important things in aspect of our lives is relationships we have with each other and our sense of belonging in our community. So when we assist people we support to expand their social roles within their community, we offer opportunities for people to expand their social network. So performing social roles leads to being more likely to be treated as valued members of the larger community. And social roles offer people an opportunity to contribute, and in so doing, find their unique place in the community. Roles are active and not passive, taking on responsibilities and actions associated with social roles. We define if expectation we have for ourselves and that of others have of us. So when we talk about supporting people in social roles, we not only help people to find their unique place in the community, we also choose to support people to be part of building a better community for everyone. Advance, please. People may need support to match their interests and skills with opportunities, more likely to be treated as valued members of the larger community. You know, we think about how we can actively explore the interests and desires of people we support. You know, we may want to pay attention to the behavioral cues as well as verbal statements. Look at where people seem happiest, where they seem most comfortable. We may also think about where other people in the community who have the same interests and desires gather. Organizations ensure that a broad array of role options are available to people, and this lends itself to the thinking of the 3 E's: education, exposure, and experience. You know, we might want to explore a variety of places and ways in which people might engage in the community, subscribe to the community newspaper, and use the community events listing to brainstorm ideas about things that are happening in the community. Organizations support people to overcome obstacles with opportunities, information, technology, and skill development. This is where we want to try to support people to try a number of activities before settling on the things they enjoy the most. After that, we might support people to successfully engage in those activities that they decide they like. I mean, we want to ensure we offer support that also minimizes the disability issues and maximizes the person's gifts. Advance, please. So we want you to look at your personal outcome measures manual, and we know you all have it with you because you carry it with you wherever you go. But if you refer to page 66. Now, in some of, this is the decision-making question for personal outcomes. In some of the first manuals that were published in 2017, this question was not printed. We have since changed this in the electronic version on our webpage. So please either write this, the following statement in your manuals, or reprint the page 66 for your use. So 16.4. The decision-making question that needs to be added to your manuals is the person satisfied with the number of social roles they have? This continues to be a type and frequency outcome. Next, Kathy will discuss examples of potential social roles and what your thoughts are on these social roles. And are they social roles or not? Okay, Kathy.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about 3 people, and please pay attention. I'm not asking whether or not the outcome is met. So as we talk about it, remember we're talking about social role. So the question is does this person have a social role or do they not? So first we're going to talk about Bill. And Bill is someone who goes to church regularly. He's on time. He's punctual for everything he does. He typically sits in the same place every service. And he leaves immediately when the service is over. He is a member of the church. Helen goes to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, belongs to the women's group. She volunteers for lots of events. So she spends a lot of time at the fellowship hall, including things like when there's a funeral, she's helping prepare meals and welcome the family and people for the after funeral gathering. She coordinates the prayer list. She collects donations and arranges for visitors when church members are sick or when they have a new baby or they have other life events, important life events that happen. The minister and other members of her church know her, they count on her, they rely on her. Tony goes to church on most Sundays. After service, he stands outside of his church and he invites people to come join them in the fellowship hall because they're having donuts and coffee. He always joins the church members in the fellowship hall after service, and he gets kind of acknowledgement. The minister always thanks him for recruiting and inviting new people to join them for donuts and coffee after the service. And he will usually come to other activities in the church that involve things like sharing food or a meal. So in thinking about those three scenarios for Bill and Helen and Tony, I want you to mark on our poll all the people you think from this brief description definitely have a social role. You don't need more information. You are absolutely convinced that they have a social role. Remember, this is not about the outcome, so we're not worried about type and frequency. It's about whether or not Bill, Helen, and Tony have a social role. So you can vote. So there might be a little technical issue. Megan, because we talked to her, oh, you don't have a mic though, do you? Let me find somebody else. Who has a mic? Would you raise your hand so I can let you talk to me? I have a question for you. Michael, how about you? Can you hear me? Can you talk to me? All right, so I'll tell you what's happening is I believe that you should be able to see the poll, but it doesn't look like anyone's voted. Valerie, how about, Valerie, something's up with your Zoom. How about Van? Can you hear me? Can you talk to me? All right, so I'm not sure the polling's working, but neither is this. So I'm going to end the poll and share results, and you'll see what I'm seeing is that nobody apparently voted. So, so I'm just going to share the discussion that we've had in other situations where people have done this. All right, so the likelihood of people saying, let's start with Helen. Most people would clearly say Helen has a social role. She's recognized, she's missed if she's not there. She has some very defined roles in her church. And so most people would say without a doubt, Helen has a social role at church. So if you disagree with that, or if you want to talk about that, you can type in a question in the question box. Okay, I'll wait for questions while I go on to talk about Bill. Bill, on the other hand, when we talk about Bill, we usually get a lot of discussion about whether or not he has a valued social role. And we might need some more information about this. Being a church member is not always seen as just as a social role. Generally speaking, there's some indication that people take on the roles and responsibilities. So in this particular church, maybe going to the service on a regular basis is what church members are expected to do. Maybe for Bill, this is his choice about what we need, but we really don't have a lot of information to say, without a doubt, Bill has a social role. Anybody have any discussion, comments about that?
Kathy, this is Betsy.
Yes.
Hi, I think that we had talked about this too, that some people perceive different types of churches and different roles to different levels of what they actually are doing in a church. Different churches require different things when you're a member. So some people may be thinking about that as well. But it really does state that, are they acknowledged and recognized in a particular social role, where it seems like Helen and Tony have much bigger social roles.
So thank you, Betsy. And then Tony, on the other hand, you know, whereas Helen's roles are clearly very formal and very defined, Tony's may be a self-appointed role, but he is acknowledged and recognized for that role that he has of being welcoming and inviting other people. And so most of the time we would think that Tony has a social role in the church that he has. Again, we may have other information, we may gather things. So when we look at this, what we're saying is that Helen and Tony have social roles. Bill may have a social role. We would need more information about what the expectations, his expectations are, and what are the expectations of the church. So I had hoped that we would have some discussion and I'd get a little bit more feedback about this. So I'm hoping that as you're thinking about this and talk about it, that we could maybe have more discussion in the question and answer period. So, but let's just look again at the decision-making questions on social role. And so we do have to know first if the person has a social role. So in order to answer the next questions, we'd have to know from talking with Bill and Helen and Tony that they indeed have a social role. And then we would get into whether or not they have a variety of social roles. And are they satisfied with the type and with the frequency of social roles that they have? So the type and the number of social roles that they have. And then we could make decisions about whether or not the outcome is present. But before we know if the outcome is present, we have to know if it's a social role. So again, is the person satisfied with the type and number? You talked about that. And we've talked a little bit about the social role. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
This is Anne. I think for me, one of the criteria is actually the title of that outcome, perform social roles. And I think our dialogue and our discussion is good about, does the person have it? But one of the criteria for really is the verb in having a duty, a function. And I think if we go back to Bill's scenario, we'd really need to find out from his perspective, how does he see his showing up on time, his sitting in the same seat or pew? What function does that have? Is he performing from his perspective something that is, you know, contributing to the greater good? So I would, and I know we don't have the time or the opportunity to ask additional questions about from Bill, but those would be things just to consider. How does he view that? What his perspective is? What is he performing, contributing as pertinent to those characteristics that you listed?
Anne, I think that's a great statement. I think the other thing is, even to the point of, do other people know that that's where he sits? And so do they avoid sitting in that spot because they recognize that it's his spot?
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's an excellent point, Anne, along with the idea that the outcome does belong to the person. So clearly, to understand if Bill actually has a social role, once again, going back to what Anne and Kathy, you said as well, what are the people around him and how did they perceive his role?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do we have anyone else that's asking questions or raising their hand, Kathy?
No, we do not.
Okay. Well, let's move forward. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that. You know, having a discussion about social roles prior to talking about person-centered thinking is important. Person-centered thinking is the foundation for person-centered planning. And when CQL, we look at our valid and reliable data, and it tells us that people with disabilities are 51 times more likely to perform social roles when organizational supports are in place. Person-centered thinking is something that virtually everyone who touches a person's life needs to know, because change is seen as most powerful when we use person-centered thinking tools in supporting people. So with that, Anne, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about person-centered thinking? Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Yes, and I don't know about other people, but I am just sorry to interrupt the flow of this, but the question and answer box for me just is not allowing me to put in a question. So maybe it's just me not navigating properly, but that may be why we may not be getting more discussion. Just saying, I'm not quite sure.
Okay. You can advance, I think, Kathy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Betsy, for that nice introduction. And what the remaining portion of what I'm going to be speaking about today, these are all things that we have researched and have resources available to us. So a lot of what we'll be sharing with you today are things that are available elsewhere. And at the end of the webinar, you'll see the resources list. And just so that you're aware, these are nationally recognized tools and some strategies that we hope to just share with you as we reference back to that cultural shift of person-centered thinking for an organization. So just to be clear in our mind what the differences are between person-centered planning and person-centered thinking, the planning piece of it is an event or a process used to capture information for our support plans, our individual service plans, our plan of care, etc., versus what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. Person-centered thinking is really the culture, an ongoing way of thinking and using skills and tools and providing supports to people on a daily basis. And while we need person-centered planning, without the cultural shift, better planning, person-centered planning, may lead really only to better paperwork. So how do we change the way we think and the way we do business around person-centered thinking? Most of us are pretty familiar with some of the person-centered planning process. We may be a little less familiar with those cultural changes that are necessary to implement person-centered planning. Forward, please. I think this slide is so relevant, and really what is taking place on a national level is absolutely we recognize that there have been changes over the course of our being involved in services and supports, that attitudes have been changing. But now also, even nationally, we're seeing that some of the guidelines and the regs that are expected of us as state providers, of us as agency providers, of us as individual supports providers, that is where we are, you know, the changes is a coming, and the expectations of the larger funders are also hoping to reflect what that means. Forward, please. Just looking a little bit back at the history of how changes in attitudes, how shifts have taken, and there's some good examples here. We've seen the civil rights movement, we've seen the feminist movement and women in work, we've seen the disability rights and self-advocacy movement, and then also the movements in aging America population. And really what we're looking at now is how we're seeing society at large is also making this cultural shift, and we're glad to be a part of that. So forward, please, advance. In the history, there are particular to people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. There has been the passage of pretty important pieces of legislative support. They're listed there as the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what we're looking at are those things in our field that have helped to pave the way for our continued cultural shift, and how these things have begun to, or those pieces of legislative have supported us to get where we are today on our journey. Advance, please. This is a picture some of you may or may not be familiar with, but for those of you who are, it's a picture of what the Willowbrook Institution looked like in the 1960s in New York State. There were, in the mid-60s, more than 6,000 people housed or living there. And in 1972, some of you may be familiar, Geraldo Rivera did an expose of what the conditions were, of what that situations were for people who were living there. And with the public outcry, it generated and contributed to the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act of 1980. Forward, please. And again, another picture of what was found during that expose. So that was one of the major jump starts of the beginnings of our continued journey, which we hopefully no longer see conditions like that. People were, as a result of that, there was a state and national stipulation guidelines to close those types of facilities. Community placements were supported. And actually, for those of you who may be attending from New York State, many of the people who were in that institution and others within the state of New York, you are now providing many of the community supports for people. Forward, please. In the person-centered history, you've got some great resources out there. Things started, as I had mentioned, with the result and the findings of what had happened in institutional settings. There's quite a bit of, excuse me, of great information starting from Wolfensberger all the way through the publications by O'Brien and Forrest. There's recent information in the 1990s and the 2000s from Michael Smull, from Susan Harrison, for person-centeredness and reviews from Helen Sanderson. And as I said, most of the information that we'll be sharing with you, these are all resources that will be listed at the end of our webinar, so you can certainly look back into those. Forward, please. With those resources that I just referenced, those really were all resources and people and experts in the field and professionals in the field that were looking for social change as a result of what they were finding, how people were living in those large congregate institutionalized settings, and what the platform of that then allows us to continue to talk about what organizational transformation looks like. So when we're talking about organizational transformation, just some of the core values that the experts in the field have shared with us are listed here. One of them that I would just like to spend a little bit more time on is the fourth bullet here, in that empowering supports help people to accomplish their personal goals. And if we link that back to what we were talking about in people performing different social roles, we're getting to know people through the use of the personal outcome measures, that the people of what the values of what this transformation and cultural shift looks like is the people who are supported are center and core to what the support system is built around, which is very different from what we were seeing in those pictures from the from the 1960s. They're all relevant, all of these values here, organizing ourselves around people to help make visions reality. As Betsy had mentioned, in that building relationships with others, how that provides values and a sense of well-being and a sense of being a contributing member, and recognizing people's abilities and building upon them and maximizing and capitalizing and supporting people to stretch and grow. Forward, please. Some additional values that are listed here. This is, oops, back one page, Kathy, sorry. This is where our cultural shift enables, so having these values core and center to what we are all about, these are the values that enable those person-centered plans to be meaningful, to have value, to really take off and to be meaningful for people's lives. So striving to increase people's access to preferred environments, to preferred activities, easily linked back into what we were talking about in people performing different social roles. And again, how this links to the use of the personal outcome measures in finding out what people's preferences are, or what opportunities we can offer to folks in the areas of the 3 E's, education, experience, and exposure, if people have come to us or have had limited awareness of what those are. Forward. Thank you, Kathy. Getting into some of the person-centered thinking tools, I've listed a couple that I've tapped into today from all the available resources that are out there and available to us. I'm just going to be sharing a few that we will have a little bit of time to talk about today. It would take a lot more time to go through all of the tools and the strategies. Certainly all of them are out there, have person-centered thinking expertise behind them. We just don't have the time to go through all the different tools today, but I'll be taking you through a few. Forward, please, Kathy. The two that I'm going to be sharing with you really on the tools of person-centered thinking. As I said, I referenced Michael Small. He's the chairman of the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices. There are a plethora of person-centered thinking tools available through their website, and I'll be just sharing a few with you today. Advance, please. As I said, for the person-centered thinking tools, for those of you who are continuing on your cultural shift, on that organizational transformation, the nationally renowned resources and sources that are out there are available to you. What I think we would want you to be encouraged to do would be to ensure that You've done some research, done a little bit of investigation about what tools and what strategies might match with you, and then target those for your organization that seem to make the most sense as you continue forward and as we keep the person-centered thinking, the value and the core principles of people being, center and core to everything. Find those that work for your organization, for the way that you all do business. Advance, please. On this slide, what I've done for you, and I would just want to orient you to what this is. These are, it's a slide that has a lot of the different skills and the different types of tools that are available to you. So across the left-hand side, there are some different skills and some different core concepts that are available out there. So you'll be able to see the list. It starts with sorting, important 2, important 4. There's something called a donut sort. There's the 4+1 questions, the learning log, what's working, what's not working, relationship mapping. So those are some of the tools and strategies. What the following columns offer for you, and we've just laid this out on one page, and then I'll have some more on the next slide, is what is it that these tools and strategies offer for you as an organization, how you might use them, what implementation thoughts might you have for your organization. And if you, thinking about it, and if you were applying this within your own organization and continuing your transformational growth, what would it be important for you to use these for? So it kind of gives you just a little bit of a logic chain to set up yourselves. Is it something that would be of value? Is it something that maybe isn't quite in sync with us? Next page, please. And again, this is just continuing on. As I said, we've done some research, be able to list for you what all those skills and tools are out there. And this is a continuation for person-centered thinking skills down that left-hand column, starting with rituals and then good day, bad day, all the way down to matching. Again, what those things and what those tools and skills offer for you. What are some of the implementation strategies or thoughts that you might have in possibly using them? And then how would you use this skill within your organization? What is it that you would use to support your direct support professionals, your leadership team, for people who are supported? What is it that would, what would be impacted if you're using these skills? Advance, please. Just to take a little bit of time, and I'm going to just walk us through one of those tools, skills that was listed on that table chart a few slides ago. This one is called sorting what is important to and important for, a core concept in person-centered thinking. And just, again, to be mindful of that all person-centered thinking tools have these common goals and characteristics. We're trying to find out what's important to the person, to find a better balance between what's to and what's for the person, and then to discover, gosh, once we know these things, how do we implement what we have learned? Okay, next page, please. Walking us through the first part of this tool of important to, important for, let's focus on the important to piece of that, which sort of makes sense. What's important to the person includes those things in life which help us to be satisfied, to be content, to be comforted, to be fulfilled, and to be happy. And then it includes, first off the bat, people to be with, what we have in our relationships. So going back to what we earlier were talking about in people having social roles, this is absolutely a way for us to figure out how people feel satisfied, how people feel fulfilled, how they feel they are contributing and being valued. It includes other things that are important to people that what people like to do, where they like to go, what's important to know about how people like to set up their days or their rhythm and pace of life. And even if we think about ourselves, some of us at some times in our life, or maybe it was for me, I'll just use my example, the pace that we wanted to set for ourselves was maybe go, 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 versus other times in our life we may take a little bit longer to reflect on things. What's important for the person, the last one down there, things for people to have that are theirs, that either have sentimental value or provide a sense of contentment or comfort or provide a sense of belonging. All right, next slide, please. Continuing on with the concept of this skill, the important two, it includes what matters the most to people, their own definition of quality of life. And as absolutely you can see, this links very much to what we discover about people during our conversations using the personal outcome measures. The important two part of this person-centered thinking skill, it's important for a person to include, for us to find out not only what people say, but how people act. I don't know about you, but I think I was reading somewhere that a lot of the communication that we have with one another, and I think I've read something as high as almost 90%, a lot of that can happen without having to use words. So how people are reflecting and how they're communicating what's important to them not only happens with what people say, but it's also how people behave or how they act. Next, please. Typically, these are things that, we've taken some time and getting pretty good at being experts about gathering information, what is important for the person. So now we've moved away from important to, and we are on to important for. Issues of health, certainly, treatment, medical conditions, issues of safety for people's well-being, being free from fear, feeling safe, and then what others see as necessary to help the person, what's important for the person to be valued, what's important for the person to be a contributing member and have relationships and connections. Next, please. On this slide, you see the scale there. What we might see here is this is where we have a little heavier balance on the important for the person and possibly more in line or in sync with what may be the caregiver model, what's important for the person for health, what's important for the person for safety. So those core components of health and safety. And in, the way services were organized as we as agencies and as you as agencies were developing over the course of this transformation, many services and agency supports were organized around a diagnosis and a type of support need. Services and supports were focusing on people's labels versus the person core and center. Next slide. This one is where the balance is on what's important to the person, which again, this is what we kind of need to avoid, is that this scale has gotten out of whack here. One of the mistaken assumptions of person-centered thinking and person-centered practices is that we're only listening to what's important to the person and ignore what is important for the person, which is not the case about person-centered thinking. We want to pay attention to both what is important to and what is important for. Next slide, please. And this is where we're ultimately hoping to be in our person-centered skills and our person-centered culture. This is really what we're seeking. We recognize that even in our own lives, we're seeking a balance, and it's always shifting, right? There's going to be shifts from time to time. It's even more difficult when describing what a balance looks like for another person and recognizing that those shifts are going to take place as well. And so that whole concept of the person being core and center to how we are organized or as a community of services is important for us to recognize. It will not stay stat, it will not be always the same, and continuing to find that balance of between what is important to and what is important for the person. Next slide, please. Let's also just be, continue to be mindful in our role as supporters and supporting people. I can only speak from my early on experience. Many of us have been asked, and that was what our role was. We were asked to be the fixers. We were asked to get in there and make things right, whatever that was. In those situations, the question that we have, it's a rhetorical question, but where is the power if we are fixing? Where is the power of that? Fixing may have a bit of a coercive quality, and it's more about power over rather than power with, which is really what we want to seek here, is that the power is even, and that there is no power one over another, or because of our fixing capacity or our fixing approach, that may have just a bit of a twinge of a power, just a bit more power. Next slide, please. This is another one of the skills and tools that was earlier referenced on those table slides. This is a one-page profile template, and this actually helps to put it into a one quick shot glance at a page, what is important to and what's important for the person. So I just wanted to show you what the blank template looked like, and then the next couple of slides I'll talk us through what that might look like as it's applied to a few examples. Next slide, please. In that one-page profile, it captures that information about the person at a one-page glance. You could see that there were two different sides to that. In the middle, there was a section that also helps to identify what's important to best support me. This is useful, the one-page profile, although this is what the resource is. It's useful for specific situations, school, work, transitions, looking for employment, looking for support staff. Although I myself found that this would be a wonderful tool to have as people are maybe hiring new staff, as people are introducing themselves and making new connections, so that people have a familiarization about people, about what's important to, what's important for, what people like and admire about people. All right. If you could forward, please, Kathy. Next, there we go. One-page profile, and this is of Barry. So on the left-hand side, you can see what's important to Barry. On the right-hand side, what those who know Barry say they like about him, what they admire about him, and then also there's a box about how to best support Barry. It's really clear to me that what's important to Barry is he's got people who are important to him who are listed there that make life worthwhile for him. He likes listening to his music. He must, at the top, he says he must be his own boss, staying as independent as he can. And then I thought what was interesting also is how to best support Barry. In the right-hand box down there is it's clear that he likes to laugh and he wants others to be straight with him. That's all he asks. So that's someone who maybe is a little bit more sensitive, and maybe having that straight talk kind of person may not be, that's not who Barry is. Barry is, he says he likes to have people talk with him straight. So those are good things to know as we're communicating and learning about Barry and supporting him. Next slide, please. This again is just another example of that one-page template, and this is about Jenny. Again, sort of the same type of a format, what's important to her, how to best support Jenny on the right-hand side. I think what was interesting to me is on the left-hand side, what's important to her is to be called Jenny, not Jen or any pet names. Those things would irritate her. So as if for example, I am a new person meeting Jenny, it would be really helpful for me to know that, as to not offend her and to be as respectful as I can be. Lots of other great things here. We won't have the time to go through them. If you want to, these are all available on those websites and resources that I've talked with you about, and so you certainly can do a little bit more digging into this. This is just to kind of give you a flavor of what that one-page template looks like. Next slide, please. Another one-page profile template, very, very simple, about people's personal descriptions. This is very simple. Again, a one-page, just a quick glance information. What people like about Anne, what's important to Anne, supports Anne needs to stay happy, healthy, and safe. Characteristics of people who support Anne are. So those are things that would be easily, as we're continuing our conversation with people, easy to have as a one-page, just brief description, brief introduction to people, so that we know things that are important, what's important to, what's important for. All right, next slide, please. People with disabilities and their families, of course, and this is, I hope this is like not a big issue, have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations just as others do in their community. And that whole piece that we were talking about in performing social roles, that as people are building more and more connections, being exposed to more and more opportunities, how they aspire to and contribute and being a part of their community and being valued within their community will only expand opportunities to even open new avenues and new doors for people. Next slide, please. This is what we would love to be able to do. We're not going to play this video for you today. Person-centered versus system-centered. I would highly encourage you, and I think we're going to have a few minutes at the end of this hour session, excuse me, that you may be able to do this. If you go on to the YouTube and you put in person-centered versus system-centered with Beth Mount, it's about a 2.5-minute video, which is really, really great. I would highly recommend it. It's a way to kind of put into a more formalized way that whole historic piece of transforming from basing our services and supports around a diagnosis or a disability or a label to what we're really talking about in having person-centered thinking. So I would encourage you, as we have some time at the end of this session today, maybe just go on to the YouTube and do a search, person-centered versus system-centered with Beth Mount. As I said, it's only about 2.5 minutes. So just as a kind of a nice wrap up to what we've been talking about today, I would encourage you to do that. Thank you. Next slide. So again, here are some of the tools that I've shared with you earlier. This is where we went into and did some of that research that helped us build and develop those, that table of the tools and strategies that we earlier talked about. So those are available for you to look at your leisure. Next slide, please. And then Also, some additional things on person-centered thinking, absolutely on our CQL website. We've got some good stuff available for you there. And again, some other or resources nationally that would be available for you. And just to kind of link it all back to what we were talking about, in that the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the rulings and the regs that are coming out now in what is expected of states, and which will, as you are already sensing, is trickling into the services community. Those are things that are now expected, that cultural and transformational shift of, person-centered thinking. So,
well, let's just go ahead and say one of the things is that as part of a grant that we had through the Illinois DD Council, we did develop a more accessible kind of specific person-centered plan that is available on our website as well. It uses a lot of pictures, because that's one of the things that with the person-centered planning, it's great, but it also has to be focused on the language the person uses and in a way that the person can use that plan. And so this might be helpful for you to think about, what are those other ways that we can do it? Can we do it with this template? Can we do something with taking this template and creating a voiceover PowerPoint or some little video clip that people can play on smartphones or on iPads or tablets? And then we also have some other options for fees for us coming in and doing training with you.
And Anne certainly shared that with me. I know there's some people on the call that I've worked with in past, so they know my email as well. But if you have any questions, Anne, that was really, really well done. I enjoyed listening to your presentation.
Thanks, Betsy.
You're welcome.
So Betsy, would you like me to end the call?
Absolutely. I think we're done. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we appreciate it.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.